My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 69 years old, a retired nurse, and I live alone in the same little brick house my husband and I built 45 years ago. It still smells faintly of lavender polish, and the coffee he used to brew before sunrise. Every creak in the hallway sounds like a memory trying to speak. After Harold passed, the world grew quieter in a way that hurt. People say time heals, but I think it only teaches you how to sit beside the pain without flinching. The mornings were the worst, his empty chair across the table, his mug still hanging on the hook. For a long time, I would pour 2 cups of coffee out of habit. One for me, one for a ghost. When you lose the person who shared your every routine, the silence becomes a kind of echo chamber for old regrets. That's when my son Daniel started visiting more often. He was my only child, my pride, the reason I still kept the garden trimmed and the curtains open. He would drive in from the city on weekends, bringing groceries or a box of pastries I didn't need. "You shouldn't live like this, Mom," he'd say, dusting off a chair before sitting down. His visits filled the house with a kind of light I'd been craving. I told myself he came because he missed me. Maybe at first he did. We'd talk about Harold, about his work at the construction company, about the weather, safe things that kept my heart from trembling. Sometimes he'd fix the squeaky gate or replace a bulb, and I'd slip a few bills into his jacket pocket before he left. It felt natural. A mother's little thank you. The first real request came one spring afternoon. He looked uneasy, tapping his fingers on the kitchen table. "Mom, I hate to ask, but rent's gone up again. I'll pay you back when my bonus comes through." I didn't even think twice. "Of course, sweetheart. You know if I can help, I will." That night, lying in bed, I felt strangely proud. Helping him made me feel needed again. When you're old, usefulness becomes a kind of oxygen. The next month it was a car repair. Then a late utility bill. Always small things. Always temporary. I told myself it was just bad luck, that once his situation stabilized, he'd never ask again. Each time he promised repayment, I believed him, because believing was easier than imagining the alternative. I'd worked 40 years in hospitals, on my feet through double shifts, through births and deaths and everything between. My pension wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the lights on, the garden blooming, and a few dollars aside for emergencies. Handing over a bit to help my son didn't feel like a loss. It felt like love continuing its duty. But slowly, without noticing, I began arranging my life around his needs. The 5th of every month, pension day, became the day I waited for his call. If it didn't come, I felt restless, anxious, like something essential was missing. It wasn't the money. It was the illusion of connection. Friends warned me gently. My neighbor Elaine, who's been beside me since the kids were toddlers, caught me one morning counting cash at the kitchen table. "Still helping Danny, huh?" she asked, folding her arms. "He's had a tough year," I said quickly. She raised an eyebrow. "Margaret, you've said that 3 years in a row." I laughed it off, told her she was overreacting. But when she left, her words lingered like a draft sneaking under the door. I wasn't blind, I just didn't want to look too closely. Denial, I've learned, is a comfortable chair, until it collapses. Sometimes, when I open my banking app, I'd catch the total shrinking and feel a knot in my stomach. Then I'd picture Daniel as a little boy, hair sticking up like a dandelion, running to me with scraped knees. I'd hear him say, "Don't cry, Mommy, it doesn't hurt." And the knot would loosen. One evening, he arrived with a bouquet of lilies, Harold's favorite. "Thought these might brighten the place up," he said, smiling wide. They did, until I realized later that night, he'd left with an envelope of cash from my dresser drawer. He must have seen me take it out earlier to pay the landscaper. I told myself he probably meant to ask and forgot. Grief makes you rewrite reality in Kinder ink. By winter, helping him had become habit. He'd text before pension day. "Hey Mom, I'll stop by later." No explanation needed anymore. I'd have the money folded neatly inside a white envelope, the same way I used to pack his school lunches. Sometimes I even wrote his name on it. Old instincts die hard. Each time I handed it over, he'd hug me tight and whisper, "You're my angel." Those words kept me alive more than the money ever could. But angels, I suppose, aren't meant to grow tired. And I was. I started skipping my own comforts. No new shoes. Cheaper medicine. Instant coffee instead of the good kind Harold used to buy. I told myself it was fine, that my son's success would make it worthwhile in the end. He just needed a little more time. When friends came over, I'd change the subject whenever Daniel's name came up. I didn't want their pity or their judgment. He's doing great, I'd say, forcing a smile. But inside a small voice whispered, if he's doing great, why does he keep taking from you? The loneliness worsened. Nights stretched long and airless. I'd watch television without seeing anything, waiting for the sound of his car in the driveway. Sometimes he'd show up late, smelling faintly of cologne and city air, talking fast, eyes darting around the room. He'd say things like, "Mom, I promise this is the last time." And I'd nod, knowing it wasn't. It's strange how love can make you complicit in your own undoing. By the end of that year, Daniel's visits had a rhythm I could set my clock to. He'd come, collect, hug, and leave. My heart would ache in the quiet afterward, but at least I could tell myself I wasn't forgotten. Elaine noticed the change in me, the weight loss, the tired eyes. One morning she placed her hand over mine and said softly, "You look like you're fading, Margaret." I wanted to tell her everything, but the shame was too heavy. Mothers aren't supposed to feel afraid of their children. So instead I said, "I'm fine. Just getting old." But deep down, I knew something inside me was fraying. I began writing little notes on scrap paper, dates, amounts, reasons he gave. Not for confrontation, just to make sense of the fog. March 5th, $400 car payment. April 5th, $600 medical bill. May 5th, $300 emergency. I kept them in a tin cookie box under the bed. It became a private confession. Each note a tiny betrayal recorded in my own handwriting. And still, I defended him. To myself, to anyone who dared suggest he was using me. "He's my son," I'd say. "He wouldn't hurt me." Looking back, I realized that was the moment the ground began to crack beneath my feet. The exact moment love became fear disguised as faith. But at the time I didn't see it. I only saw my boy, standing at the door with that familiar smile asking, "Got it ready, Mom?" And I, without hesitation, would nod and hand him the envelope. I thought I was helping him survive. I didn't know I was teaching him how to drain me slowly. The months rolled by like the slow ticking of the old clock in my living room. Each 5th of the month, the day my pension arrived, became a ritual neither of us spoke about. He'd appear at the door around noon, holding his phone in one hand, keys in the other, smiling just enough to pass for affection. "Hey Mom, got a minute?" Of course I did. I always did. He'd sit at the kitchen table, eyes flicking toward the small wooden box where I kept my pension envelope. I'd pretend not to notice, offering coffee or pie. He'd decline, then start talking about bills, deadlines, the bad luck that seemed to follow him everywhere. And I'd hand it over, quietly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. At first it was a few hundred, then 500, then nearly the whole pension, with the promise that he'd cover next month, when his paycheck came through. But the next month, there'd be another emergency. And another. I used to think poverty was measured in money. But it isn't. It's measured in dignity. The way you start apologizing for being deceived, for still hoping someone will change. My friends noticed. Elaine, sharp as ever, brought it up one afternoon as we sat on her porch. "Margaret, you're pale. Have you been eating properly?" I lied without blinking. "Just tired. My blood pressure's been acting up." She didn't believe me. "You can't keep giving him everything. He's not a boy anymore." Her words stung because they were true, and because I couldn't admit it out loud. I began to dread pension day. The night before, I'd toss and turn, counting the hours until the inevitable knock. I'd look at the money on the table and imagine keeping it for myself, maybe buying fresh fruit, maybe getting the leak in the roof fixed. But when he showed up, all my resolve melted. He had a way of looking desperate but composed, like a man balancing guilt and entitlement perfectly. "Mom, I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate," he'd say. And I'd nod, thinking of the tiny boy who once cried over a broken toy. That image always defeated me. One evening, after handing him nearly $1,000, I walked to the corner pharmacy for my medication. When I reached the counter, I realized my card had only $26 left. I smiled awkwardly at the pharmacist, bought half the prescription, and told her I'd return for the rest next week. That night, I split my blood pressure pills in half. The humiliation didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly. I started checking my account balance more often, then avoiding it altogether. I stopped inviting neighbors over because I didn't want them to see how bare my fridge was. I told myself simplicity was good for the soul. But simplicity born from fear is just another kind of poverty. Then came the day everything cracked. It was a sunny Saturday in late August. Elaine had convinced me to join her at the farmer's market downtown. I almost didn't go. Guilt whispered that I should stay home, just in case Daniel came by. But she insisted. "You've spent too long waiting on other people, Margaret. Come see some life." We walked through stalls of ripe peaches and sunflowers. For a moment, I felt light, free even. Then, as we stopped near a cafe to rest, I froze. Across the street, through the glass window of a trendy restaurant, I saw him. Daniel. He was laughing. Not the tired, worried laugh he showed me, but an easy, full laugh. Across from him sat a woman I didn't know. Young, confident, sipping wine. The table between them was crowded with plates of steak, oysters, and a bottle of red that probably cost more than my grocery budget for the month. Elaine followed my gaze, her smile fading. "Is that?" "Yes," I whispered. For a second, I couldn't move. I watched him gesture animatedly, showing her something on his phone, and I recognized the watch on his wrist, the gold one I'd given Harold on their 30th anniversary. My hands began to tremble. He had sold it. Elaine touched my shoulder gently. "Come on, let's go." But I couldn't. I stood there, hidden behind a lamppost, watching my son. The man who said he was struggling to afford rent. Living like a stranger in a better world. When the waiter set down another bottle of wine, I turned away. The sunlight felt too bright. The crowd too loud. My stomach twisted. I didn't confront him that day. I went home in silence, walking past our gate with mechanical steps. Inside, I sat on the couch for hours, staring at the wall where our family photo still hung. Daniel at 10, missing a front tooth, grinning like tomorrow was a promise he'd always keep. That night, I didn't cry. I just felt hollow. The next day, he showed up right on time. The smell of expensive cologne entered the room before he did. "Morning, Mum. I hope you got the payment ready." His voice was casual, practiced. I said nothing. I just looked at him. For the first time, he noticed the silence. "Everything okay?" I nodded slowly. "You were out yesterday?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah. Work lunch." "Why?" "Nothing," I said, sliding the envelope toward him. My hand shook, but my face didn't. He left whistling. As soon as the door closed, I walked to my bedroom and opened the tin cookie box under my bed. Inside were months of notes, dates, amounts, excuses. I laid them out on the quilt like puzzle pieces. The total was staggering. More than $20,000 in less than 2 years. My entire savings had evaporated through my own hands. I whispered to the empty room. What have I done? That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every time I defended him. Every time I'd silenced Elaine. My stomach burned with shame. Around midnight, I wrote a letter to Harold in my old journal. "You always said Daniel had your charm and my stubbornness. Maybe that was the problem." I promised myself I'd stop helping him. That next month, when he came, I'd say no. But when the 5th arrived, he called early. "Mom, I hate to ask, but they're threatening to cut my power. I just need this one time." And I folded again. After he left, Elaine stopped by with fresh bread. She saw the envelope missing from the table. "Again?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Margaret," she said, her voice breaking, "you're killing yourself for him." I turned away. "He's my son." So was Judas someone's son? Her words hit harder than I expected. That night, I stared at the ceiling until dawn. I thought about all the patients I'd cared for as a nurse. People who'd given everything for their children and died alone, still waiting for a call that never came. I used to pity them. Now I understood them. A week later, I decided to go into the city, to see where Daniel lived, to reassure myself that maybe he was telling the truth. His address was on one of the transfer slips. I took the bus, heart pounding. When I arrived, I expected a modest apartment. What I found was a sleek condo building with marble floors and a concierge. "I'm here for Daniel Holloway," I told the guard. He looked confused. "Mr. Holloway? Pentose? Mom, do you have an appointment?" "Penthouse." I didn't answer. I just turned around and walked out. My knees trembled all the way down the steps. The ride home felt endless. The city blurred past the window, gray and unforgiving. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that, staring at my hands. They'd spent decades healing others. Now they were the instruments of my own undoing. Something changed in me that day. Not anger yet, but clarity. I realized Daniel wasn't just taking my money, he was taking my sense of self. Every withdrawal wasn't just from the bank, it was from my soul. Over the next weeks, I started noticing small things I'd ignored before. How his texts came only near payday, how he avoided eye contact when I mentioned the past, how he never asked about my health anymore. He'd stopped seeing me as a person. I'd become a transaction wrapped in love. One evening, I walked through the garden Harold and I planted decades ago. The roses had withered, the soil dry from neglect. I knelt, touching the brittle leaves, and thought, this is me, still standing but fading. That night, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the empty street. I realized I'd built my life around waiting, for Harold to come back, for Daniel to change, for someone to save me. But no one was coming. I opened my journal and wrote one line. Next month it ends. When the 5th of September came, I was ready, or so I thought. But as soon as I heard his car in the driveway, my resolve wavered. He walked in like always, confident, entitled. "Hey Mom, you look nice today." I looked at him for a long moment. Then quietly, "Do you ever feel guilty, Daniel?" He froze. "What do you mean?" "About taking from me." His smile faltered. "Mom, you're overthinking again. I'll pay you back." "When?" I asked. He laughed uneasily. "You make it sound like I'm robbing you." That laugh, light, dismissive, was the final crack. He took the envelope and left as if nothing had happened. When the door closed, I whispered to the silence, "You already have." That was the night I decided to stop crying and start fighting. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I couldn't live another month like this. I turned off the light, sat in the dark, and began planning. Because a mother's love may forgive, but it doesn't have to surrender. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by silence thick enough to feel. The only sound was the clock above the mantel, each tick echoing like a countdown to something I hadn't yet named. On the table in front of me lay my notebook, pages filled with dates, amounts, lies. Every entry a wound that had never healed. I flipped through them slowly. June 5th, $500 rent. August 5th, $900 car repair. October 5th, $1,200 emergency. My handwriting wavered toward the end, the letters growing smaller, shakier. It was like watching my own strength fade in ink. I sat there until the clock struck midnight. Then, quietly, I whispered to the empty room, "Enough." I wasn't sure what enough meant yet, but I felt it in my bones. It was more than anger. It was the faint heartbeat of courage after years of silence. The next morning, I woke before dawn. For the first time in months, I made coffee just for myself. No extra cup. No waiting. I sipped it by the window, watching the sky shift from violet to gold. The light felt different. Not warm exactly, but honest. I pulled out every bank statement I'd kept, every transfer slip. When I laid them across the dining table, it looked like a crime scene. And in a way it was. Only this time, I wasn't the victim. I was the witness. By mid-morning, I put on my beige coat, grabbed my folder of papers, and locked the door behind me. The cold air stung my face as I walked to the bus stop. My hands trembled around the folder, but there was a strange steadiness inside me. I wasn't walking to the police station for revenge. I was walking there to reclaim my life. The precinct was small, the kind that smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. Behind the counter sat a young officer with tired eyes and a kind smile. His name tag read Officer Ramirez. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked gently. I hesitated, then laid the folder on the counter. Yes. I need to report. Not a crime exactly. Or maybe it is. I don't know anymore. He opened the folder and scanned the first few pages. Bank transfers, notes, printed messages. His expression changed from polite curiosity to quiet concern. Is this your son? He asked. I nodded. And these are transfers to him? Yes. Every month. For years. He said he needed help. But I found out he's been lying. I don't know how to stop it. He studied me for a moment, his voice careful. Mrs. Holloway, financial exploitation of a senior is a crime. Especially if it involves coercion or deceit. You did the right thing by coming here. The words "you did the right thing" made something in me crack. I hadn't heard that in so long. He brought over a senior protection officer named Detective Claire Benton. A woman in her 40s with calm eyes and an air of quiet authority. She listened as I told her everything, from the first loan, to the day I saw Daniel in that restaurant. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she folded her hands. Mrs. Holloway, you have more evidence than most people who come to us. You have every reason to press charges. Charges? I repeated. The word felt too heavy. I don't want to destroy him. I just want it to stop. She nodded slowly. Then maybe we can help you do exactly that. There are ways to intervene without taking it to court. Sometimes all it takes is a warning. Something that shows him you're not afraid anymore. I thought about that. About fear. About how it had lived in my chest like a tenant I'd never asked to move in. What would I have to do? I asked. She explained the process, a formal statement, documentation. A report that would allow them to confront him legally but gently. They could accompany me the next time he came, make it clear that what he was doing was illegal, and that there would be consequences if it continued. Would you be willing to face him? She asked. For a long moment, I said nothing. The idea of seeing his face, the one I'd loved since the day he was born, filled me with a pain so sharp I could barely breathe. But then I remembered the sight of him at that restaurant, laughing, carefree, while I was at home splitting pills to stretch my medication. Yes, I said finally. I'll face him. Detective Benton nodded. We'll handle the rest. When is he coming next? The 5th, I whispered. He's never missed a 5th. She made a note. Then we'll be ready. I left the precinct feeling lighter and heavier all at once. The sky had turned gray, the kind of gray that smells like rain. On the bus ride home, I looked out the window and watched the city blur by. I wondered if Daniel had any idea what was coming. Maybe not. Maybe he still thought of me as the same soft-hearted woman who couldn't say no. That night, I cleaned the house as if preparing for company. I dusted Harold's photo, straightened the curtains, and set out 2 chairs in the living room. One for me, one for the officers. Every motion felt deliberate, like I was reclaiming each inch of my space from the ghost of fear. As the clock neared midnight, I sat by the window, notebook on my lap, pen in hand. I started to write, not for him, not for the police, but for me. Dear Daniel, tomorrow, you'll walk through this door like you always do, expecting me to hand you what's left of my life. But tomorrow I won't be waiting with money. I'll be waiting with the truth. I'm not doing this because I hate you. I'm doing this because somewhere along the way, you forgot who you were, and I forgot who I was. That ends now. I stopped writing and stared at the page until the ink blurred. Then I closed the notebook and whispered to the empty room. Courage, Margaret. Just courage. When dawn came, the world was silent and still. I brewed a single cup of coffee and set it beside me. On the mantel, the photograph of Harold seemed to watch me with quiet approval. I straightened my shoulders and looked around the room. Everything was ready. Tomorrow, when Daniel arrived, he wouldn't find the mother who always gave. He'd find the woman he'd forgotten I could be. The one who finally remembered her own worth. And this time, I wouldn't be alone. The morning air felt unnaturally still. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. I woke before sunrise, not because of nerves, but because I hadn't slept at all. Every tick of the clock drew me closer to the moment I'd been both dreading and preparing for. By 7, the house was spotless. Every cushion straightened, every photo dusted. The kind of tidy that hides fear. On the table sat a neat stack of papers. My statements, notes, and the letter I'd written to Daniel but would probably never give him. At 8:30, a car pulled quietly into the driveway. 2 officers stepped out, Detective Benton and Officer Ramirez. Both wore plain clothes, simple jackets that made them blend in with any neighbor dropping by. "Good morning, Mrs. Holloway," Benton said softly. "Are you ready?" I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly as I led them inside. They took seats near the hallway, positioned where they wouldn't be visible from the front door. "He's due around 9, I whispered. Benton gave a reassuring nod. "We'll stay out of sight until you give the signal." The house fell into silence again. The minutes crawled. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. On the table in front of me was a white envelope, not with money this time, but a single piece of paper. A list of every withdrawal, every lie, every piece of my life he'd chipped away. At exactly 9, the doorbell rang. I froze. My throat went dry. For a second, every part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home. But then I remembered the promise I'd made to myself. I took a deep breath, steadied my voice, and opened the door. There he was. My son. "Morning, Mom," Daniel said cheerfully, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You're up early. Got the envelope ready." His words were casual, entitled, like this was just another day, another transaction. I closed the door slowly behind him. "Yes, Daniel. I have something ready for you." He smiled, glancing toward the table. "Perfect. You're a lifesaver, you know that." He reached for the envelope, but I placed my hand over it first. "Before you take it," I said quietly, "I need to ask you something." He frowned slightly. "What's this about? Do you remember the watch you used to wear? The gold one your father gave you?" He blinked, thrown off by the question. "Of course. Why?" "I saw it," I said, voice steady. "On your wrist. At a restaurant. The same day you told me you couldn't afford rent." The color drained from his face. You saw me?" "I did." He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. The silence between us was sharp, heavy. "Mom, it's not what you think." I lifted a hand, stopping him. "It's exactly what I think. I know about the apartment, the car, the dinners. You weren't surviving, Daniel. You were using me." He shifted, eyes darting toward the door. "You're overreacting. I was going to pay you back." "Stop," I said quietly. "You've been saying that for 3 years." For a moment, he looked like a scolded child again, shoulders tense, lips pressed together. Then his expression hardened. "So what now? You're going to cut me off? Fine. I'll figure it out. You don't have to make a scene." I took a slow breath and gave the smallest nod toward the hallway. "It's not me making a scene." Detective Benton and Officer Ramirez stepped out from the shadows. Daniel's eyes widened. "What the hell is this?" "Mr. Holloway," Benton said calmly, showing her badge. "I'm Detective Benton with the Community Protection Unit. We need to talk to you about ongoing financial exploitation of a senior citizen." He spun toward me, disbelief twisting his features. "Mom, you called the police on me?" I held his gaze. "I called for help, Daniel. Because I didn't know who you were anymore." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Unbelievable. You'd rather humiliate me than talk like an adult." "Adults don't steal from their mothers," I said softly. The room fell silent again. He glanced between me and the officers, realization dawning that this was real. There'd be no smooth talking his way out. Benton's tone remained calm but firm. "We're not here to arrest you today, Mr. Holloway. But we are opening a report. Your mother has documented everything. Continued contact under false pretenses will lead to charges." He shook his head. "You can't do this." "I can," I said quietly. "And I have." He turned to me then, eyes wild, voice cracking. "How could you, Mom? After everything I've done for you? Everything you've done?" My voice trembled but didn't break. "You took from me until there was nothing left to take. You turned love into a bill I could never pay." For a moment he said nothing. Just stood there, chest heaving, anger fighting shame in his eyes. "I was trying to build something," he muttered. "You wouldn't understand." "I understand more than you think," I said. "I understand desperation. I lived it. But I never made my suffering someone else's burden. That's the difference between us. He looked at the officers again. So what happens now? Benton replied evenly. We'll file an official warning and repayment plan. You'll be contacted by our department to set up restitution. But today, you're leaving this house. And you won't come back uninvited. Daniel stared at me. You really mean this? I nodded. Ido. He let out a shaky laugh, rubbing his temples. You've changed. No, I said quietly. I finally stopped pretending. He stood there for another few seconds, eyes darting around the room. At the family photos at the table, at the envelope he couldn't take. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The sound of the door closing was the softest and loudest thing I'd ever heard. The officers stayed a few minutes longer. Benton placed a hand on my arm. You did incredibly well, Mrs. Holloway. That took courage. I nodded, unable to speak. When they left, the house felt impossibly quiet. But it wasn't the kind of silence that hurt anymore. It was clean, light, free. I sank into the chair by the window and looked outside. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, spilling gold across the garden. For the first time in years, I noticed the roses blooming again, small, stubborn bursts of color that refused to die. I realized then that freedom doesn't always come from fighting others. Sometimes it comes from finally choosing yourself. I looked toward Harold's photo on the mantel. It's done, I whispered. It's finally done. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel old. I just felt alive. The day after the police left, I woke up to a house that felt like it had exhaled. The air seemed lighter, the silence less oppressive. I made coffee and sat by the kitchen window, listening to the world outside. Birds, distant traffic, a neighbor's dog. It sounded like life returning. For years, my mornings had been a countdown to his knock on the door. Now there was no knock. No footsteps. No weight pressing on my chest. Just peace, strange and fragile, but real. I walked through the house slowly, noticing things I'd ignored. The way sunlight fell across the hallway rug, the smell of lavender from the linen drawer. It felt like reclaiming pieces of myself one detail at a time. Later that afternoon, Detective Benton called to check on me. How are you holding up, Mrs. Holloway? I'm adjusting, I said. It's quiet, but good quiet. She told me Daniel had been formally warned, that restitution papers would follow, and that he'd promised to start repaying what he owed. I didn't ask for specifics. I wasn't waiting for money. I'd already been paid in something far more valuable. Peace of mind. That night, I slept through without waking once. It was the first time in years that I didn't dream of loss or fear. Just stillness. A few weeks later, a letter came, Daniel's handwriting on the envelope. My heart gave a nervous flutter as I held it. For a long moment, I debated throwing it away unopened. But a mother's heart is a strange thing. Even when it's been broken, it still reaches for the pieces. Inside was a short note. Mom, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I really am. I never meant to hurt you. I just kept thinking I could fix everything later. I was ashamed to face how far I'd gone. The police scared me straight. I'm trying to do better now. I started counseling. I'll pay back what I can, even if it takes years. I understand if you never want to see me again. But I hope someday you'll forgive me. Love, Daniel. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my dresser drawer. Not out of anger, but out of boundaries. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't the same as forgetting. Still, that night, I lit a candle in the living room and whispered a prayer. Not for him to suffer, but for him to heal. Over the following months, the house began to change with me. I fixed the leaky roof, painted the kitchen walls a soft yellow, and replanted the garden. The roses came back strong, stubborn and radiant. Neighbors started stopping by again. Elaine brought her famous apple pie one Sunday and smiled when she saw me humming while trimming the hedges. Well, look at you, she said. You've got your glow back. I laughed softly. It's amazing what happens when you stop living in fear. She squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Margaret. So was I. Each morning, I created new routines. Walks through the park, volunteering at the local clinic, reading to children at the library. The days no longer revolved around waiting for someone else's needs. They revolved around life. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I thought about Daniel. Not with bitterness anymore, but with a sad kind of hope. I imagined him trying, failing, trying again. The way we all do when we finally decide to grow up. A few months later, I was sitting on the porch when a car pulled into the driveway. My chest tightened when I saw who stepped out. Daniel. He stood there, hesitant, holding a small box. His face was thinner, older somehow, not from age but from realization. Mom. I nodded, cautious but calm. Hello, Daniel. Can I come in? For a moment, I considered saying no. But then I remembered what Detective Benton had told me. Healing isn't about reopening doors. It's about knowing you can, and choosing when it feels safe. So I nodded. Just for a bit. He followed me inside. The house smelled of fresh cookies cooling on the counter. He glanced around, as if seeing it for the first time. You've changed things, he said quietly. I had to, I replied. The house needed light again. He nodded, eyes lowering. I brought you something. He opened the box. Inside was Harold's watch, the one I'd seen him wearing months ago. I bought it back, he said softly. Pawn shop still had it. It's yours. I stared at it for a long time, then took it gently. The metal was cool against my palm. Thank you, I whispered. He swallowed hard. I really am sorry, Mom. I've been going to therapy. Got a steady job now. I'm trying to fix things. I nodded, tears threatening but not falling. Good. That's what you should be doing. He hesitated. Do you think we could start over? I looked at him, my son, both stranger and child, and took a deep breath. Starting over doesn't mean forgetting what happened, Daniel. It means learning from it. He nodded, eyes glassy. I understand. I poured him tea, and we sat in silence for a while. No tension, no blame, just two people sitting on the edge of forgiveness. When he left, he hugged me. It was hesitant, unsure, but real. As I watched him drive away, I didn't feel sadness. I felt something softer, release. Weeks passed, then months. The police followed up on the repayment plan, and Daniel made small deposits regularly. I didn't check the amounts. I didn't need to. I wasn't measuring change in dollars anymore. Instead, I measured it in the way my laughter came easier. The way my shoulders no longer carried invisible weight. I started journaling again, not to document pain, but gratitude. One entry read, I thought courage meant facing others. Turns out, it means facing yourself first. Another said, love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. And surrender is the slowest kind of death. These weren't lessons I'd wanted to learn so late in life, but maybe that's when truth hits hardest, when you've lived enough to recognize it. One afternoon, while pruning the roses, I found myself whispering to Harold's photo resting on the porch table. You'd be proud of him, I think. He's trying. And I'm okay now. Really okay. The wind rustled through the garden, carrying the scent of roses. For a moment, I felt as if Harold was there, not as a ghost, but as warmth. That evening, I sat at my writing desk, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote the final page of my story. This isn't a tale about betrayal. It's a story about awakening. About learning that love without respect is just captivity dressed as devotion. About realizing that even at 69, you can still choose yourself. I paused, letting the words settle. Then I added one last line. The day I waited with the police wasn't the day I lost my son. It was the day I found myself. Now, whenever I tell my story, people look at me with tears in their eyes and ask, weren't you afraid? And I always answer the same way. Yes. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what must be done despite it. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt trapped by love, guilt, or obligation, I hope you remember my story. You are never too old, too tired, or too late to reclaim your dignity. I don't tell this story to shame my son. I tell it because someone out there is still handing over their peace for a smile they know is fake. I want them to know it's okay to stop. It's okay to say no. Because real love doesn't mean endless giving. Real love has boundaries. And those boundaries can save your life. Now, if my story has touched your heart, If it reminded you that strength can bloom even in the twilight years, please subscribe to the channel. Stories like this are shared here every week, because sometimes all it takes is hearing someone else's truth to find your own courage. Thank you for listening. And remember, even after years of silence, one brave morning can change everything.